This is part 2 of the lesson on A Heart of Darkness. Personification is the giving of lifelike characteristics to inanimate things or concepts. In Heart of Darkness, Africa itself is being personified as a monster which the Europeans attempt to conquer but ultimately cannot. The setting is an archetype, a night journey. It also fits the youthful initiation archetype through the narrator's eyes. Note that there is no African voice or perspective present. This is more a reflection of European thought about Africa. Point of view. Why does Conrad use the unnamed narrator, who is not a central character in the story? This is especially unusual because Conrad is basically the character Marlowe. It's particularly odd because most of the story is Marlowe retelling his story. Maybe this is done to create a perspective to analyze the characters more than to connect to them. Or maybe this is done so as to not allow us inside of Marlowe's head. Conrad seems to both ridicule and defend colonialism. It's worthy if it has an idea behind it. Marlowe says, "The conquest of the earth, which mostly means the taking it away from those who have a different complexion or slightly flatter noses than ourselves, is not a pretty thing when you look into it too much. What redeems it is the idea only. An idea at the back of it. Not a sentimental pretense, but an idea. And an unselfish belief in the idea. Something you can set up and bow down before and offer a sacrifice to." One could argue that the main theme of this story is the idea that the illusion of civilization is important to maintain. Note that the fault of the helmsman and of Kurtz is in lacking restraint. Africa seems to evoke the primal dark side of Kurtz. Civilization would otherwise suppress these murderous, prideful, and lustful urges. Note that Marlowe even seems to be following under its spell. He goes up a path and finds Kurtz apparently dragging himself to some savage ceremony. When he sees him, murderous thoughts enter Marlowe's mind, and he realizes that he could probably kill Kurtz. He is feeling the same kind of impulses that Kurtz has felt. In the end of the story, the famous line, "The horror," is uttered by Kurtz. What is the horror? Is it Africa? Is it the lack of civilizing forces? Is it what is in a man's heart, or what one can do to each other? We'll be discussing this within our discussion board this week. Another worthwhile question related to the horror. Why doesn't Marlowe tell Kurtz's fiancée about his real last words? During the story, Kurtz's attitude changes through the time he spends in Africa. At first, he demonstrates pity and seeks to help the natives. Later, he declares, "Exterminate all the brutes." We need to discuss why this change in attitude has occurred. Why is Kurtz deified by both Marlowe and the natives? Marlowe seems fascinated by Kurtz's change. He becomes obsessed with him about halfway through the story, but more with hearing his voice than seeing him. He refers to Kurtz as a gift, and is fascinated by his ability with words. Note that he first really openly discusses his obsession with Kurtz right when the helmsman has been killed and his blood is pooling at Marlowe's shoes. Kurtz can be viewed as a symbol within this story. Note that Kurtz discussed being seen as a deity by the savages, but with the hope of using this to enlighten them. It's possible to view Kurtz as symbolic of England. Why does Marlowe stay loyal to Kurtz? He seems to feel one and the same with Kurtz, that all men would go down this path easily if out of touch with civilizing influences. Conrad uses the title, Heart of Darkness, as a term for the Congo, or the heart of Africa. But it also seems to suggest that humans have inherently dark hearts, given towards selfishness and evil. This story is arguing that the rules, structure, and maybe religion of Western culture steer us away from these influences that we would otherwise follow. The cultural effects of Heart of Darkness were significant. This story reinforced the view of Africanness as savage. It reinforced the view of colonialism and even slavery as justified. And in the debate on human nature, as to whether humans were inherently good, inherently bad, or simply a blank slate, this story came down clearly on the dark side.